Greetings, gamers, HNS, and I'm making a lot of Nintendo videos lately. I love Nintendo more than anything, don't get me wrong, but what else I love more than anything? Final Fantasy. I've been playing this series a lot more recently, alongside all the Nintendo games of Fortnite that I've been playing, and I just had a lot of fun enjoying them through all the games. Today, I'd love a time, to look at every Final Fantasy game, at least the main series. We're looking at the main series and the direct sequel games. And so just 10 to 13 returns are included, and 10 to 13 later returns are included, 1 through 15 is included. I am including 7 Remake, even though it's brand new. Even though I'm going to talk about that one for like a few seconds, and you'll see why later in the video. But what am I going to do with what I talk about them? Well, I'm going to be talking about what the definitive version of them are. The version is a lot of them have been re-released on many different consoles. And if you're a beginner to the series, you may need some help when trying to decide what version to play. Well, I've got you covered. So today, guys, welcome to my video where we look at what the definitive version of each Final Fantasy game, starting off with the original game on the NES. So start looking at the original game on the NES that you're seeing here. This game came out in 1987 in Japan and was re-released in the US. Well, it was localized to the US in 1990 after Square Enix was having some problems and they were trying to see if this game could sell to continue on, which is why it's called Final Fantasy, even though it's not really final. And the NES version is the version that you may be familiar with if you owned a Wii back when the Wii Shop channel was open. This game was on the Virtual Console. And which unfortunately can't buy anymore because it didn't release on the Wii U Virtual Console outside Japan, and same for the 3DS Virtual Console. It is on Switch Online. But if you have an NES Classic, you can play the original. However, it's not the definitive version. I mean, it's a great game and all, and a really good entry and a really good kickoff to the series. But there's also several other re-releases that I do want to address. Let's talk about them in just a minute. Alrighty, guys. So now here we are on Final Fantasy, on the Origins version of the first game for the PlayStation 1. Yeah, the original PlayStation. Released in 2002 or 2003, just after Final Fantasy X was released on the PS2, which we'll be going to talk about way later in this video. But this version, it's definitely a big improvement over the original. The original game was good, but it's added new dungeons to explore. I think it may have added new characters, added new graphics, and it's FMV stuff, a remixed soundtrack, and a bunch of others. I'd say this isn't the definitive version, but there's definitely one of the definitive versions. But there is another slightly great version too that we'll be talking about too. But I'd say this has so much features on the original. It's better for newcomers as well. You can now save easier. The graphics are way better. Adds new stuff. I call this one the definitive edition. Well, actually not. This still wasn't the definitive version. So next up, we have the non-Souls version. This version isn't nearly as good as it's not nearly as good as the PlayStation version, but it's still a good version. I mean, it had 4 dungeons. It added 4 new dungeons, added a few new stuff, and added a bit of new graphics. It's not the best version, but it's still a good way to play this game on the go. But there are better ways to play it on the go later in this video, let me tell you. And then the character sprites I do like a lot. Also, my mom may be talking in the background, sorry. My mom might be talking in the background, but this version added new, and the sprites and the graphics are still pretty good. As for the PlayStation version with Final Fantasy Origins, but it's still decent. And even with Final Fantasy 2 as well, which we'll be talking about soon. Alright, so next up we have the PSP version and the mobile versions. Yep, this is the definitive version. I mean, it has the best graphics. It's best for playing Final Fantasy I on the go. Get this on your phone or tablet or the PSP. It's amazing. And I tell you, this is the definitive edition. It had so much new stuff, new dungeons, new things, the PSP version, and new graphics, and it's a bit more accessible for newcomers too. And it really adds new things to the table. And the new character, version has a few new character classes, possibly too, and new stuff. I'd say this is the best version. Get rid of a PSP or for your phone. It is amazing. This is the definitive edition, hands down. But now let's talk about Final Fantasy II. Let's go. Alright, so next up, we got Final Fantasy II, which also came out on the NES, was part of the Famicom Toy Final Fantasy. Now this game originally did not release in Japan, and it also didn't come out to Virtual Console either when Japanese-only games came over, so this game's only available in Virtual Console in Japan. But this game has been released on PlayStation, on PSP, and mobile, and on GBA, that I'll be talking about. But Final Fantasy II, did not release in Japan. It was outside Japan. And the reason, the reason why was because Final Fantasy I came out in 1990. It's so close to the SNES that so everyone wanted to just focus on the new console and not release anything on the NES much. So they decided to just move on to do Final Fantasy IV and called it Final Fantasy II in the US. And then they skipped 5. After they skipped 2 and 3, and then they did Final Fantasy VI. They called it Final Fantasy III. And once again, this is the real Final Fantasy II that came out on the Famicom. I'm not talking about Final Fantasy IV, the one with Cecil, and the one that opens up with the airship. I'll be playing that one in a few minutes. But the NES version, if you're Japanese, you may have this version, but it's more accessible if you play on their console, that we'll be talking about in a minute. Yep. And now we're on to the PlayStation version. This is pretty much the same. You get the FMV sequences, you get the new saving options, the new graphics, the new characters. It's pretty much the same thing. Well, for new content, not the same as the original, but same as Final Fantasy I. So, yeah. So now I got the Game Boy Advance version. It's basically the same as the Final Fantasy I on the GBA. The Dinosaurs version on Game Boy Advance is pretty much the same. Not as good as the PlayStation version, but still pretty good, I guess. Well, yeah. Same thing. Same features. You get all the same additional content. And, yeah. So, I don't know what I should say about this one. I mean, it's pretty much this. The Dinosaurs version also had the new dungeons and new characters, and very minor changes. Well, it just added a few new dungeons, that was it. Very minor, but not as good as the original it was better than the original, but not better than the PlayStation version. That came from Fantasy Origins. The novel Origins from 2003 is a great way to play it. There's 2 better ways to play it. And yeah, that we'll talk about next. So next up, we've got Final Fantasy II on mobile and Android, which pretty much has a new graphic, has everything from Final Fantasy on 1 and 2, the Origins version, the Dinosaurs version that on the PlayStation Game Boy Advance. And everything from them. It has everything, has new content even, including dungeons and new characters as well. It adds so much to the table, just like Final Fantasy I. This is also the definitive version. Play Final Fantasy I on the PSP. Well, play Final Fantasy 1 and 2 if you're gonna play Final Fantasy 1 or 2, play them on 1 and 2, play them on the PSP or on your phone. It's a vivid experience, and I wish they bring on the PC too. Because we're going into PC ports throughout this video as well. Let's move on to Final Fantasy 3, the final game of the Famicom trilogy of Final Fantasy. Alright, gamer, next up, we got the final Famicom Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy 3. And just like 2, this game did not release outside Japan originally. It came out so close to the SNES, and Square didn't really have time to release, to localize them, and they were trying to move on and just play Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6. And they decided to just call Final Fantasy 4 2 in the US, and call Final Fantasy 6 Final Fantasy 3. But I'd say that the Famicom version has got to re-released on Virtual Console on the Wii U and 3DS, but if you don't live in Japan and you're watching this, you'll just have to play this on other systems. And like Final Fantasy 1 and 2, where they came out on the PlayStation, on the Game Boy Advance. This game did not. This game never came out to PlayStation like Final Fantasy 1, 2, 4. Well, I'm not gonna go to 4 until next. Several Final Fantasy games have got to re-release on the Game Boy Advance and PlayStation, but this one never did. Nope. We had to wait years and years and years to experience the story of Luneth for the first time and everything. And in 2006 for a remake. Let's talk about it. So now, Final Fantasy 3 took the longest to localize. Only Final Fantasy 2 released outside Japan in 2003 on the PlayStation, which was about 15 years. We had to wait the same for this one, but slightly more. I mean, this took the longest. It took 16 years for it to get localized. We waited until 2006 when it came out on the DS. And the DS version is one of the definitive ways to play it. I mean, it looks so much better, and it plays way better. It has 3D graphics and new features and new stuff. However, it's not the definitive version. Wonder why? You'll see coming up. So now here we are at another re-release. Because after the DS version, this game was re-released on the PSP, adding new features, including the magnet system. It added the option to have the 8-bit music. Added several new features too. Added better graphics. And the PSP version was also re-released on Android and iOS. So the mobile version, the PC version. But I'd say the definitive way to play this is on the Android or the PC version. They add so much more to the table and better graphics and new features the PSP version had. So get this game off the Apple Store or the Google Store on your phone, or buy this off of Steam. I say those are the definitive ways to play. Let's move on to Final Fantasy IV for the SNES now, shall we? The first off game of the SNES trilogy. Alright, guys. So here we are at Final Fantasy IV on the SNES. Yep. We're now on the SNES. We're now on a 16-bit console. And this game also had a bit different versions. The Japanese and English versions feel a bit different, I guess. I mean, because the SNES version was several people's introduction to the series, and the series was popular. It didn't become as popular as ever until 7, which I'll be talking about in part 2. Because guys, you didn't know, I'm actually splitting this video into 2 parts because it's probably gonna be long, and I'm already 15 minutes in, so I'm doing 2 20-minute parts. We're doing one covering the 2D era, which is going to be 1 through 6. We're doing another one for 7 through 15 in part 2, which was going to be a bit shorter, but yeah. So the SNES version is a pretty good version. If you live in Japan, you probably know this. It's really hard But this game also has been released on the Virtual Console in the US, but you can't buy that there anymore since the Virtual Console's gone on the Wii, and the Wii U Virtual Console version is only on Japan, which the Japanese version is really hard. You'll see why later in the video. But this version is pretty good. However, there's bad re-releases because there are some better ones coming up. I mean, yeah. Well, this game did get released on the PlayStation, but it's slightly not as good. I mean, it had some stuff, but you'll see. Alright, so next we got the PlayStation version. It's pretty much the same as the SNES version. It's not the definitive version, both the same, just very minor changes. But this game came out as part of I forgot what it was called, but it was some Final Fantasy collection. They also had Chrono Trigger. So I'll be doing a video on that a later time because I haven't played Chrono Trigger yet. But I'm making a video on Chrono Trigger 2 later time. I think it was in a bundle with it. I think they even called Final Fantasy Chronicles or something. But Final Fantasy and a Chrono Trigger. And yeah. And this version is very minor changes, mostly some cutscenes and stuff. Yeah. But you'll see more coming up. That's much better. There's even better version on the GBA. So next up, we're at the... And this version is superior in every way to the PlayStation SNES version. It's Final Fantasy IV Advance. There is an even better 2D version that's considered the definitive version. Free version that's not definitive because of how hard it is. But anyway, this version adds brand new graphics, adds new dungeons, new features. I think it may have the FMV cutscenes. It got the new saving system and everything. This is actually truly, I guess, the definitive version, and truly is good. And it has the easier difficulty of the North American SNES and PlayStation versions. And I'd say it's it's not the definitive way, but also the very definitive way coming up on the PSP. Now I will be talking about the 3D remake too. And just like 1, 2, and 3, Final Fantasy IV also had a PSP version with 2D graphics, and based on the US SNES version that had lower difficulty. This is the definitive version. It has better graphics, everything from the previous versions. It adds new modes, new characters, new dungeons, new saving systems, better graphics. Yeah, it adds like new things to your characters, I believe. It also includes the sequel game, Final Fantasy IV: The After Years, which I will not be talking about, but it does include that. It includes all Final Fantasy IV and IV: The After Years, and it also includes like a new epilogue or prologue or something set between 4 and 4: The After Years. And this makes that the automatic definitive version. But what about the 3D version, which is not definitive, and you'll see why coming up, but let's see. So on Final Fantasy III, where I consider the 3D remake and the PSP mobile and PC version of the Definitive Edition, I do not share that with Final Fantasy IV remake. The reason why is because this version is very hard. That's because it is based on the Japanese version of the original SNES game, and they reused graphics from 3, and they brought the PC, mobile, and DS, and this game is really only for veterans of Final Fantasy II that have played the original SNES game several times and are very familiar with it. And if you're Japanese and you're watching this, which I don't know if you are or not, I think it's or you may not. I don't really know. Well, then sure play this. But if you are more familiar with the American SNES version, just play the PSP version instead. If you don't have a PSP though, well, then just play the PlayStation version or the Game Boy Advance version, or emulate them or something. And yeah, let's move on to the Final Fantasy V. Or actually, guys, I don't want this video to be too long, so I'm actually just going to end it right here. Because I can do split this up into 3 parts. I can talk about Final Fantasy 1 through 4 in this video. I covered 5, 6, 7, and 8 will be the next one. And they'll be doing 9 through 15 after that, so please stay tuned. But I hope you guys like this video. Please like it, and if you're new here, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. And I'll see you guys next time for part 2, and then for part 3. Agent S out. Bye!